Breakthrough. Chapter 2, Madeline. Madeline walked into her house and promptly tripped over a shoe that was sitting in the middle of the floor. Rubbing her elbow, Madeline stood up and looked at the pile of stuff from the hall closet that was strewn everywhere. She knew what that meant. The inspectors had been there. She'd completely forgotten it was that time again. "Dad," she called. "Mom." "Good." Her father's voice came faintly from upstairs. "Start cleaning up down there." "Okay," she called. The inspectors always left a terrible mess when they came. Annoyed, Madeline began putting things back where they belonged. "Why do they have to tear everything apart?" she muttered as she slammed a closet door. "It's not like we could hide anyone in a cupboard." She almost added, "It's not like we'd ever hide a disability in our house in the first place," but she stopped herself. Of course, Madeline, her older brother Nick, and their father would never do anything like that, but they'd never lied. Madeline's mother had, and she'd paid the price. Now everyone was watching her at school and on the streets. Of course, the inspectors would be extra careful. They didn't need liars in the community. It did help that Nick was now in training to work the reader, but still, they had to do everything they could not to damage their reputation even further. Of course, they had all been tested after the event, and none of them had known a thing, but that didn't stop people from being suspicious. Not that she could blame them. Liars are terrible people, and Madeline had looked at the families of other liars the exact same way. Finishing up in the front hall, Madeline headed down the hall and into the kitchen. In the doorway, she took a moment to appreciate the sheer horror of the mess. It was most definitely worse than usual. Every cupboard had been emptied and hung open. The floor was littered with cups, plates, and bowls. The dishwasher was wide open. The shelves pulled out as far as they could go. The fridge hadn't been emptied, thank God, but when she looked inside, Madeline could see things had been moved. "You have got to be kidding me," she muttered as she began picking up dishes. "I get that they want to make sure, but this is ridiculous." "Madeline, are you finished?" her father called as they headed down the stairs. "Almost," she said, placing the last cup back on its shelf. "They were very thorough." "More like suspicious," her father muttered. "Almost a year and they still think we'll turn bad." "What do we have to do to prove that we're not like her?" Madeline didn't reply. It was the same question she'd asked herself time and time again, but she hadn't found the answer yet. That night, Madeline lay in bed thinking about Nick. 3 weeks ago, he'd left to complete his training on the reader, and they hadn't heard from him since. She wondered what he was doing and if he was enjoying his training. That made her smile. Of course he was. For as long as Madeline could remember, her brother's dream had been to one day be the master of the reader. And he had been lucky and skilled enough to be one of the few people who were picked to go into training. As far as she knew, he was one of the best. She wasn't sure exactly when the choice would be made, but she thought it would be soon, which hopefully meant that he had a good chance of winning. Thinking about the reader reminded her of her upcoming birthday, when she would have to be tested again. She knew it was necessary to be tested, and of course she loved the reader, but being hooked up to it, having the contents of her mind on display like that, did make her feel a little bit uncomfortable. This wasn't against the rules, though. A lot of people felt that their privacy was being invaded, but no one preferred the alternative, having liars running free in the community, infecting others with their disease. The next day in school, Madeline walked into class and took her seat. She tried to ignore the eyes she knew were on her. She wanted to scream, "I didn't do anything. I know nothing. Stop looking at me like I'm getting ready to lie at any moment." But she didn't. That wouldn't have made a good impression. Besides, things really weren't as bad as they had been. In the first couple of months after her mother's secret had been revealed, everyone stared openly. Some even asked questions, even though that wasn't really allowed. Now, only a few people stared outright. There were still a lot of furtive glances when they thought Madeline wouldn't notice, but she always did. And she tried to convince herself that that would all stop eventually. "Wow," Madeline's friend Nina commented, sliding into the chair next to her at lunch. "I can't believe you're still getting those looks." "Yeah," Madeline said. "Does it bother you?" Nina asked. "Not as much as it used to," Madeline said, "but yeah, it still does." "They'll forget about it in time," Nina assured her. "Yeah, I know," Madeline said, sighing. "I just hope it's sooner rather than later." but Madeline was beginning to wonder if they would forget about it. It had been just under a year since her mother had been found a liar, and her family was still considered outcasts by a lot of people. It was almost as if there was more to the story, something that everyone except her knew about. But, of course, that was silly. There was nothing else. It was just that adult liars were very uncommon in the community. Actually, lies in general were uncommon, but it was more likely to find a child that had lied. Allowances were made for children under the age of 13. But after that, the death penalty would be put into action. The only liar that Madeline had known, besides her mother, was a boy in her class. He told their 8th grade teacher he had to go to the washroom when he really just wanted to talk to his friends. He hadn't been found out for 7 months, but on his 14th birthday when he was tested, he was killed. It was such a little thing, inconsequential, but it was enough. It proved that he was untrustworthy, so he could not be allowed to live. It was as simple as that. Still, it had been hard on the boy's family to know that their only son had lied, almost as soon as he'd reached the age limit. The boy hadn't even lied as a child, just that one time, but it had been enough to end his life. "We have to be so careful," Madeline said. "What?" Nina asked. Madeline blushed. She hadn't meant to say that out loud. "Sorry," she said. "I was just thinking about that boy back in grade 8. "Oh," Nina said, and was silent. No one liked to think about a child liar. It was too sad. After school, Madeline took the long way home. It was quieter that way, and she wanted to be alone. She didn't go that way often, and after a few moments, she realized that the neighborhood she was walking through was unfamiliar. "Ah, crap," she thought. Was she lost? Had she taken a wrong turn? She looked around for someone to ask for directions, but all of the houses were dark and silent. Then she saw someone peering out of one of the windows. "Oh, good," she thought. But when she looked back up at the window, the figure was gone and the window was dark. "Nice," Madeline muttered as she trudged up the path and rang the doorbell. After a long pause, in which Madeline heard nothing from inside, she tried again, but there was still no sound. "Fine, be that way," she muttered, turning away from the door and heading back to the road. But as she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The person had seen her, Madeline was sure of that, so why hadn't she answered the door? Just then, she saw a familiar sign. Breathing a sigh of relief, she hurried towards home. She had homework to do, and she wanted to get started. When she finally got home, she was unsurprised to see her father already there. "You're late," he commented, looking up from his latest crossword puzzle. "What were you doing?" "I went the long way and got turned around," Madeline explained. "Oh," her father said. "It was weird," Madeline said thoughtfully. "I went to ask for directions from someone, but when I knocked on the door, no one answered." "What's weird about that?" her father asked. "Not everyone gets home this early." "I know," Madeline said. "But the thing is, I could have sworn I saw someone in the window before I knocked." Her father's expression hardened. "Do you think someone was hiding?" he asked. Madeline shrugged. "Could be, I guess," she said. "Where exactly was this?" he asked. Madeline closed her eyes, trying to remember the street name. "I'm pretty sure it was someone on Raven Crescent," she said finally, "but I'm not sure where." "Well, thank you for telling me," her father said. "I'll look into it. For now, put it out of your mind." Madeline nodded and sat down at the table to start her math work. She tried to do as her father said and forget about the girl, but she couldn't quite manage it.